The committee chamber was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the scratching of a pen on paper. C-SPAN's cameras captured it all: the packed gallery, the reporters leaning forward in their seats, the tension thick enough to choke on. At the witness table stood Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her white blazer crisp under the television lights, her hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who delivered this performance 1,000 times before. "And that," she declared, her voice rising with righteous fury, "is why this nominee embodies everything corrupt about American capitalism." She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the committee members, lingering pointedly on the elderly senator from Louisiana who sat at the far end of the Republican side. Senator John Kennedy, 73 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, a yellow legal pad covered in what looked like doodles. He hadn't looked up once during her entire testimony. "Secretary-designate Morrison talks about opportunity," AOC continued, her voice sharpening. "But what he really means is protecting his billionaire friends while working families can't afford groceries. What he really means is tax cuts for his donors while teachers live paycheck to paycheck." The progressive activists in the gallery erupted in applause. Chairman Thompson banged his gavel weakly, but the demonstration continued for several seconds. AOC's social media team, stationed in the back row, was already cutting clips for Twitter and TikTok. The algorithm loved moments like this. Kennedy still hadn't looked up. He was drawing something on his legal pad, a crawfish wearing a tiny crown, surrounded by what appeared to be broken glass. Next to the pad sat a folder, a very thick folder. The label was visible to anyone with decent eyesight: Ocasio-Cortez, Ethics Violations and Lifestyle Contradictions. Several reporters in the press section noticed it. Their fingers moved faster across their keyboards. AOC pressed forward, sensing she had the room's attention. "And some members of this committee," she pointed directly at Kennedy now, "particularly those from states with long histories of economic exploitation, seem perfectly content to drag us back to an era where the wealthy prospered and everyone else fought for scraps." Kennedy's pen stopped moving. He set it down carefully, almost delicately, like a surgeon placing a scalpel on a tray. He removed his reading glasses, folded them with deliberate precision, and looked up. His eyes were calm, almost kind, but there was something in them that made AOC pause mid-breath. Something patient, something dangerous. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez," he said softly, his Louisiana drawl thick as bayou mud, "I do appreciate your passion. I truly do. You speak with conviction, and that's admirable in a young person." He opened the folder. "But before you tell the American people what kind of man I am, I think they deserve to know what kind of woman you are." The room went still. Even the activists in the gallery sensed something had shifted. This wasn't going to be another soundbite. This was going to be something else entirely. Kennedy pulled out the first document and placed it on the table in front of him. He didn't hurry. He had all the time in the world. "Let's start with something simple," he said. "September 13th, 2021, the Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala. You remember that evening, don't you?" AOC's confident expression flickered, just for a moment, but the cameras caught it. "Senator," she said, lifting her chin, "my attendance at the Met Gala as a New York elected official was entirely—" "I didn't ask if your attendance was appropriate," Kennedy interrupted gently. "I asked if you remember it, because I surely do. Everyone in America remembers it. You wore a white dress with a message written across the back. What did that message say?" She hesitated, then spoke with defiance. "Tax the rich, and I stand by that message." "Tax the rich," Kennedy repeated, nodding slowly. "Powerful statement. Really struck a chord with people. You made headlines all over the world. That was the point, wasn't it? Making headlines." "The point was drawing attention to economic inequality." "The point," Kennedy said, his voice still soft but carrying clearly across the chamber, "was virtue signaling. Because if you actually cared about taxing the rich, and not just performing for the cameras, you wouldn't have accepted thousands of dollars in gifts that House ethics rules prohibit. You wouldn't have stiffed the working-class vendors who styled you for that event. And you sure as hell wouldn't have worn a dress designed by a woman who owes over $100,000 in unpaid taxes. He pulled the first page from his folder. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take this step by step, shall we? Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, I have some questions for the witness. Real questions about real documents with real consequences. Chairman Thompson, caught completely off guard by the turn in proceedings, could only nod weakly. Proceed, Senator Kennedy. AOC remained standing, but her hands had moved from confident gestures to gripping the edge of the witness table. Her knuckles were white. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and smiled. The kind of smile a chess master gives when announcing checkmate in 12 moves. Class is in session, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, and today's lesson is about the difference between performance and principle, between what you say you believe and how you actually live, between demanding accountability from others while refusing to accept it yourself. He turned to the first page of his evidence file. Let's talk about your relationship with the rich and powerful, starting with that fancy party you attended while wearing your little slogan. The progressive activists in the gallery had gone completely silent. AOC's social media team had stopped filming. Even the most partisan Democratic senators looked uncomfortable. The mirrors were about to shatter. Kennedy clicked a remote, and the screen behind him illuminated. The photograph appeared. AOC on the Met Gala red carpet in her infamous white dress. Tax the rich, emblazoned in red letters across the back. She was smiling broadly, flanked by designer Aurora James, surrounded by celebrities in couture gowns and tuxedos worth more than most Americans earned in a year. Beautiful photograph, Kennedy said mildly. Really captured the moment, but let's talk about what this moment actually cost, shall we? He clicked to the next slide. A detailed breakdown of expenses appeared. Ticket price for the Met Gala, $35,000 per person. Now you claim you were invited as an elected official and didn't have to pay. Fair enough. But that free ticket, that's called a gift, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. And under House ethics rules, you can't accept gifts worth more than $50. A $35,000 ticket is somewhat above that threshold. AOC's lawyer, seated directly behind her, leaned forward to whisper urgently. She shook her head, refusing the guidance. Senator, she said, her voice tight, as a New York City elected official overseeing cultural institutions, I'm regularly invited. And your boyfriend, Riley Roberts, Kennedy interrupted pleasantly. What cultural institution does he oversee? Because you got him a free ticket too. That's a second gift of $35,000. Kennedy clicked to another document. But let's move past the tickets for now. Let's talk about what you wore. This white gown, custom-made by Brother Veli's designer Aurora James. Retail value for a custom gown of this nature, approximately $15,000 to $20,000. You paid how much for it? AOC hesitated. The dress was borrowed for the event. You paid $200, Kennedy said, reading from a document. According to the House Ethics Committee investigation, and yes, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you were investigated for this. We'll get to that in a moment. You paid $200 as a rental fee. The committee found the actual rental value should have been $1,300. He looked up at her over his glasses. That's an $1,100 gift you received by underpaying. Then there were the shoes, lovely red shoes, very eye-catching. Retail value, $635. You paid how much? Silence. According to these records, you initially got them for free, claiming they were also borrowed. Only after the ethics investigation started did you pay something. Let's see here. You classified them as rentals at a reduced price, still well below fair market value. Kennedy pulled out another page. Then we have designer handbag, jewelry, hairstyling, makeup services, hotel room for you and Mr. Roberts, transportation. All of these goods and services provided to you in connection with this event. Total value, according to the Office of Congressional Ethics, over $7,300. He let that number hang in the air. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, when did you pay for these goods and services? My office handled the payments in accordance. When did you pay? Kennedy repeated, his voice patient but firm. AOC's lawyer stood up. "Mr. Chairman, I need to consult with my client." "She can consult after she answers," Kennedy said pleasantly. "It's a simple question. When were the vendors paid?" AOC took a breath. "Payments were processed over several months as invoices were received." "Let me help you with the timeline," Kennedy said, pulling out a detailed document. "The Met Gala occurred on September 13, 2021. Industry standard for event services is payment within 30 days. So payments should have been completed by mid-October 2021 at the latest. Is that correct?" "I'm not familiar with industry standards for your makeup artist," Kennedy continued, reading from the document. "She completed services on September 13, 2021. Sent her first invoice on September 20, 2021. Sent a second invoice on October 25, 2021. Sent a third invoice on November 30, 2021. On January 26, 2022, more than 4 months after the event, she filed a complaint with the Department of Labor against your campaign. Still no payment." He looked up. "On February 23, 2022, her agency notified your staff that they would be filing a legal complaint if payment wasn't received by end of business the next day. Only then, 5 months after the event, was she finally paid." Kennedy clicked to an email displayed on the screen. The text was large enough for everyone to read. "We have been extremely patient, but this is now significantly overdue and affecting our business. We need payment immediately, or we will pursue legal action." The email was dated February 23, 2022, from the Makeup Artists Agency. Kennedy turned back to AOC. "You stiffed a working-class makeup artist for 5 months, and when she threatened to sue, only then did you pay her. Is that your idea of championing workers?" The hearing room erupted in murmurs. Reporters were typing furiously. AOC's face had gone from confident to pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "The hair stylist," Kennedy continued relentlessly. "Similar story. Services rendered September 13, 2021. First invoice September 15, 2021. Final payment, February 24, 2022. 5.5 months late after threats of legal action." He pulled out more documents. "Hotel bill for you and Mr. Roberts. September 2021 charges paid December 2021. 3 months late. Transportation services. September 2021 paid November 2021. 2 months late." Kennedy paused, letting the pattern sink in. In fact, according to the House Ethics Committee's investigation, he held up an official document with the House seal, and I'm quoting directly from the committee's findings published July 25, 2025. "While Representative Ocasio-Cortez appears to have now paid for the rental value of the attire she wore to the Met Gala, and for the goods and services she and her partner received in connection with this September 2021 event, payment for these goods and services did not occur until after the Office of Congressional Ethics contacted her in connection with this review." Kennedy set down the document and looked directly at AOC. "Let me translate that committee speak into plain English. You didn't pay your bills until you got caught. You accepted thousands of dollars in gifts and services, stiffed the vendors for months, and only paid up when federal investigators came knocking." He leaned back in his chair. "You wore a dress saying 'tax the rich' to a party for rich people while accepting gifts from rich people. And then you stiffed the working-class people who styled you for the event. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast." Senator Rand Paul leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Chairman, might I ask the witness a follow-up question?" Thompson nodded weakly. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez," Paul said, his voice sharp, "you've positioned yourself as a champion of workers' rights. You've supported numerous bills for immediate payment to workers, protections against wage theft, and so on. Can you explain why you personally failed to pay workers for months, requiring threats of legal action before you met your obligations?" AOC's hands were shaking slightly. "Senator Paul, there were administrative issues with processing." "Administrative issues," Kennedy repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe ignoring bills for 5 months. Let me ask you this. Do you think the makeup artist had administrative issues when her rent came due? Do you think the hairstylist had administrative issues when she needed to pay her employees? He didn't wait for an answer. These weren't administrative issues, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. This was you accepting free goods and services from people who couldn't afford to give them to you for free, and then making them wait and beg and threaten legal action before you paid. That's not administrative. That's exploitation. Kennedy pulled out another document. His movements were still calm, still deliberate. He was building something, a case, a narrative, a trap. And speaking of exploitation, he said, let's talk about who designed your Tax the Rich dress. Aurora James, founder of Brother Vellies. You called her, and I'm quoting your Instagram post, a brilliant working-class designer. Is that correct? Aurora is an incredibly talented. Is she working class? Kennedy interrupted. Because the public records paint a different picture, let me share some information about your working-class designer. He clicked to a new slide showing a timeline of tax liens and warrants. Cultural Brokerage Agency. That's the parent company of Brother Vellies, Ms. James's fashion brand. Between April 2018 and April 2019, the Internal Revenue Service placed 6 federal tax liens on this company. Total amount, $133,220. Kennedy let that number sink in. He had a gift for letting numbers breathe, for giving them weight. Now, what's a tax lien? That's what the government files when you fail to pay taxes you owe. In this case, these liens specifically cite failure to remit employee payroll taxes. You know what that means? It means Aurora James's company took money out of her employees' paychecks, money that was supposed to go to Social Security, Medicare, federal income tax, and she kept it, never sent it to the government. He pulled up another document. That's not a civil disagreement about tax policy. That's theft. You take money from your employees' paychecks that they think is going to their taxes, and you spend it on other things. Kennedy turned back to AOC. In addition to the federal liens, the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance issued 3 tax warrants against Cultural Brokerage Agency in 2018 and 2019. Total, $114,078 in unpaid employee withholding taxes. In fact, since 2015, the company has received 15 tax warrants total from New York State. He clicked to a photo of a beautiful Tudor-style mansion. This is Aurora James's home in Los Angeles. She purchased it in September 2020 for $1.6 million, 7,000 square feet, cathedral ceilings, hot tub, master bedroom fireplace. Very nice. Except she owes $2,500 in property taxes on this house. The Los Angeles County Assessor's Office has listed the property as delinquent. Kennedy looked up at AOC with something approaching genuine confusion. So let me understand this. Aurora James can afford to buy a $1.6 million mansion in Los Angeles, but she can't afford to pay her property taxes. She can't afford to remit her employees' payroll taxes. Does that sound like a working-class designer to you? He pulled out more records. Oh, but it gets better. In October 2019, the New York State Workers' Compensation Board fined Cultural Brokerage Agency $17,900 for failing to carry workers' compensation insurance. As of the date of these records, the company owes $627 to the board and has made 0 payments. Kennedy set down the documents and removed his glasses. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you wore a Tax the Rich dress designed by a woman who doesn't pay her taxes. You attended a gala for the wealthy while accepting gifts you weren't allowed to receive. You stiffed working-class vendors for months. And then you have the audacity to come before this committee and lecture us about economic justice. He opened another section of his folder. But wait, as they say on late-night TV, there's more. Let's talk about how Ms. James treats her employees. Kennedy pulled out what appeared to be statements from former employees. I have here statements from multiple former employees of Brother Vellies. Let me read you a few excerpts. He cleared his throat and began reading. I experienced a lot of harassment when I worked for her. Aurora would ask me to do things that were not in anyone's job description, like scheduling her gynecological appointments. The work environment was so hostile that I was afraid to ask for my check. That's from a former contract employee who was eventually terminated. He turned to the next page. She never gives recognition or acknowledgement to her team. It was quite cold. That's from a former intern. The company relied on legions of unpaid interns working full-time jobs. Multiple former employees described it as a sweatshop. Kennedy looked directly at AOC. Unpaid interns working full-time. Hostile work environment. Employees afraid to ask for their paychecks. Stolen payroll taxes. And this is the woman you chose to design your tax the rich dress and called a champion of the working class. He clicked to one final slide, a side-by-side comparison. On one side, Aurora James's tax debts, over $100,000 in liens and warrants. On the other side, Aurora James's 2016 donation to Hillary Clinton's campaign, $2,700. Kennedy smiled humorlessly. She had money to donate to political campaigns. She had money to buy a $1.6 million mansion. She had money to jet to Morocco, the Hamptons, France, Indonesia, Mexico, and Italy, based on her Instagram. But she didn't have money to pay her employees' taxes or her workers' compensation insurance. He turned back to AOC. And you held her up as a role model. You wore her dress as a symbol of your commitment to economic justice. You posed for photographs with her, smiling, at a party where tickets cost more than most Americans make in a year. Kennedy gathered his papers, aligning them with precision. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, the House Ethics Committee investigated you for nearly 3.5 years over this incident. They reviewed over 12,000 pages of documents. They interviewed multiple witnesses. And on July 25, 2025, they issued their findings. He held up the official report. I'll read the key conclusion. The committee concluded that Representative Ocasio-Cortez's conduct concerning her acceptance of certain goods and services associated with her attendance at the Met Gala in 2021 was inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct. Kennedy set down the report and looked at her. You weren't exonerated, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You were found to have violated House ethics rules. You were ordered to pay an additional $3,000 to settle the matter. The only reason you weren't formally sanctioned is because the committee determined your violations weren't knowing and willful, which is Washington's polite way of saying you were incompetent rather than criminal. He leaned forward. So before you lecture this committee about corruption, about serving the rich, about economic justice, maybe you should look in the mirror. Because what I see is someone who preaches equality while partying with billionaires. Someone who demands accountability while violating ethics rules. Someone who claims to champion workers while stiffing them for months and wearing clothes made by a tax cheat who runs a sweatshop. Kennedy closed his folder. But we're just getting started. The Met Gala is just one night. Let's talk about how you live every day. Let's discuss the Tesla, the luxury apartment, and what happened when your own grandmother needed help. AOC tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lawyer was writing notes frantically. Her communications director had left the gallery entirely. The progressive activist sat in stunned silence. Senator Kennedy, calmly, opened the second section of his folder. The mirrors were beginning to crack. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, Kennedy began, his tone conversational again. You earn $174,000 a year as a member of Congress. That puts you in the top 5% of all American earners. Would you agree with that characterization? AOC hesitated. The salary for members of Congress is public record. Top 5%, Kennedy repeated. Yes or no? Income inequality isn't about individual salaries. It's about systemic. Top 5% of American earners. Is that correct? Yes, she said finally, her voice tight. Thank you. Now, let's talk about how you spend that top 5% income. Where do you live in Washington, D.C.? I have an apartment in the Navy Yard neighborhood. The Park Chelsea complex, correct. Kennedy pulled out real estate listings. Let me describe this building for the committee. Studios start at over $2,000 a month. One-bedrooms range from $2,500 to $3,500. It's described as luxury living and includes the following amenities. He began reading from the listing. Infinity pool, rooftop pool, climbing wall, golf simulator, racquetball courts, multiple cycling studios, 2 types of massage rooms, steam room, rooftop dog park, coffee bar, co-working spaces, and this is my favorite part, charging ports for electric vehicles. Kennedy looked up. This is where the working-class champion lives, in a luxury apartment complex with 2 swimming pools and a golf simulator. Monthly rent higher than the mortgage payment for a median-priced home in Louisiana. He clicked to photos of the building's amenities. The rooftop deck with the infinity pool overlooking Nationals Park, the climbing wall, the spa-like massage rooms. Look at these facilities. This rooftop deck with the infinity pool, this climbing wall, this spa. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, when you talk about identifying with working families, is this what you mean? Where I choose to live is my personal. It's absolutely your personal choice, Kennedy agreed. Just like it's my personal choice to point out the hypocrisy of someone who lives in a palace lecturing others about inequality. But let's move on to your vehicle. He pulled out photographs. On May 14, 2021, this white Tesla Model 3 was photographed illegally parked outside the Whole Foods near your luxury apartment. New York license plate. Congressional parking pass on the dashboard. Multiple sources, including a member of Congress, confirmed seeing you drive this vehicle. Is this your car? AOC's jaw tightened. I purchased an electric vehicle during the pandemic for safety reasons. A Tesla Model 3 long range. Retail price at the time of purchase, between $48,000 and $59,000. Is that correct? The exact price. Let's say $55,000 to be conservative. Now, that's an interesting choice for someone who's been very critical of Tesla and its CEO. Let me read you something you said at a Bernie Sanders climate town hall on December 3, 2018. Kennedy pulled out a transcript. For far too long, we gave money to Tesla. We gave money to a ton of people, and we got no return on our investment that the public made in creating technologies. And it's about time we get our due, because it's the public that funded and financed a lot of innovative technologies. He looked up. You attacked Tesla for receiving government subsidies. You said the public got no return on investment. You positioned yourself as opposed to companies like Tesla benefiting from taxpayer money. And then you bought a $55,000 Tesla. How do you square that circle? The vehicle market for electric cars in 2020 was limited. Was it? Kennedy pulled out another document. The Chevrolet Bolt was available in 2020. Starting price, $36,620. Union made by General Motors workers. Range, 259 miles, more than enough to get from New York to Washington. Why didn't you buy that one? AOC shifted uncomfortably. The range calculations at the time. Let me help you out, Kennedy said. You didn't buy the Union-made Chevrolet Bolt because the Tesla was flashier. It had better branding. It had more status. And status matters to you, doesn't it? Otherwise, you wouldn't live in a luxury building with infinity pools. He clicked to another image. But here's where it gets really interesting. You've been promising to trade in your Tesla for a Union-made vehicle for years now. Let me show you the timeline. A slide appeared showing dated quotes. September 2022, I would love to switch to an EV from a unionized workforce. September 2023, Face the Nation interview. We're actually looking into trading in our car now. Hopefully we will soon. January 2024, still driving the Tesla. November 2024, still driving the Tesla. Kennedy looked at her. You've been looking into trading your Tesla for a Union-made EV for over 2 years. The Chevy Bolt EUV is available. The Ford F-150 Lightning is available. Multiple Union-made electric vehicles exist, but you still drive the Tesla. Why? The market has evolved, and we're evaluating options. No, ma'am. You're making excuses. You like your Tesla. You like the status it gives you. You like the way it looks parked outside Whole Foods. which, by the way, is owned by Amazon, whose CEO Jeff Bezos you regularly attack on social media. You shop at the store owned by the billionaire you vilify. Kennedy pulled out tweets. Here's you on Twitter attacking Bezos about worker conditions. Here's you leading the campaign that killed Amazon's HQ2 in Queens, a project that would have brought 25,000 jobs to your district. You called it a victory when Amazon pulled out. He looked up. You killed 25,000 jobs for working-class New Yorkers. Then you went shopping at the Whole Foods owned by the same company while driving your non-union Tesla, and you parked illegally while doing it. The photograph of her illegally parked Tesla appeared on screen, clear as day. No parking zone. Congressional pass on the dashboard. No parking zone, but the rules don't apply to you, do they? You said in an Instagram Live, and I'm quoting, "I'm really lucky that I have not gotten a parking ticket." Lucky? No, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You're privileged. You have a congressional parking pass that lets you ignore the rules everyone else follows. Kennedy leaned back. Let me paint the full picture for the committee. A congresswoman who makes $174,000 a year, top 5% of earners, lives in a luxury apartment with 2 pools and a golf simulator, drives a $55,000 Tesla made by non-union workers from a company she publicly attacks, shops at stores owned by billionaires she claims to oppose, parks illegally, and has spent 2 years promising to buy a union-made car while never doing it. He turned directly to AOC. That's not championing workers. That's championing yourself. That's enjoying all the privileges of wealth while performing outrage about inequality. That's living in a palace while claiming to identify with people who can barely afford rent. Senator Josh Hawley leaned into his microphone. Mr. Chairman, if I might ask a follow-up. Thompson nodded, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, Hawley said, you frequently use the term democratic socialist to describe your politics. Can you explain how owning a luxury vehicle, living in luxury housing, and shopping at luxury stores squares with socialist principles? AOC's face flushed red. Socialism isn't about personal poverty, it's about systemic change. But it's not about personal luxury either, is it? Hawley pressed. When you advocate for wealth redistribution, are you planning to redistribute your own wealth, your Tesla, your luxury apartment? That's a mischaracterization of democratic socialism. It's a simple question, Kennedy interjected softly. You want to redistribute other people's wealth. What about yours? The silence was deafening. Kennedy opened another section of his folder. But let's talk about family, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Let's discuss what happened when your own grandmother needed help, because that might be the most revealing story of all. AOC's eyes widened slightly. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. This, Kennedy said, is where we see what you really value, and it's not your family. Kennedy pulled out a printed screenshot of a tweet and displayed it on the screen. June 2, 2021. You posted this on Twitter. Just over a week ago, my abuela fell ill. I went to Puerto Rico to see her, my first time in a year plus because of COVID. This is her home. Hurricane Maria relief hasn't arrived. Trump blocked relief dollars for PR. People are being forced to flee ancestral homes and developers are taking them. The images appeared on screen. A room with a sagging ceiling. Buckets on the floor catching dripping water, peeling paint. Visible water damage, heartbreaking images. Heartbreaking images, Kennedy said. Your grandmother living in these conditions. Your tweet went viral. Everyone felt sympathy for your abuela. You blamed President Trump for blocking relief money. He looked up at AOC. But some people had questions. Questions like, why is a congresswoman who makes $174,000 a year, drives a $55,000 car, and lives in a luxury apartment allowing her own grandmother to live like this? He pulled out conservative responses to her tweet. Matt Walsh, a commentator for the Daily Wire, tweeted, "Shameful that you live in luxury while allowing your own grandmother to suffer in these squalid conditions." Strong words. But he didn't just tweet. He took action. Kennedy displayed the GoFundMe page. On June 4, 2021, Mr. Walsh created a GoFundMe campaign titled, Save AOC's Abuela's Ancestral Home. Goal: $48,990, roughly the cost of your Tesla. The description read, and I quote, "On June 2nd, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reported to Twitter that her dear abuela has fallen ill and continues to live in squalid conditions since her home was ravaged by Hurricane Maria. One cannot be certain of the cost to repair Grandma's house, but surely most of the work could be completed for the price of AOC's shiny Tesla Model 3. Sadly, virtue signaling isn't going to fix Abuela's roof, so we are." Kennedy looked at AOC, whose face had gone pale. Mr. Walsh donated $499, the cost of a monthly Tesla lease payment, to start the fund. He challenged other conservatives to match his donation. And you know what happened. He clicked to show the fundraising total. Within 48 hours, the campaign raised over $104,000, more than double the goal. Thousands of Americans, many of them conservatives who disagree with your politics, donated money to help your grandmother. Not because they support you, because they have basic human decency. Kennedy pulled out the next document. Mr. Walsh reached out to you on Twitter. He sent you a direct message asking for the necessary information to ensure the money would get to your grandmother. He wanted bank details, contact information, whatever was needed to transfer $104,000 to repair her home. He looked up. "What did you do, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?" Silence. You ignored him completely, never responded to his messages, never acknowledged the fundraiser, never said thank you, just silence. Kennedy pulled out an email screenshot. Then on June 5, 2021, GoFundMe contacted Mr. Walsh with this email. Let me read it. "When a fundraiser is created to benefit another individual and the beneficiary does not accept the funds, it is standard practice to fully refund all donors. In this case, the beneficiary has made clear to our trust and safety team they do not wish to accept the donations." Kennedy set down the email and looked directly at AOC. "Your family refused the money. $104,000 raised by people trying to help your grandmother, and your family said no." He leaned forward. "Now, I can think of only two possible explanations for this. Either your grandmother doesn't actually need the help, in which case you exploited her suffering for political points against Trump, or she does need the help, but you refused it because accepting money from conservatives would undermine your narrative." Kennedy's voice dropped lower, more serious. "Either way, you used your grandmother's pain as a political prop. You posted photos of her living conditions, not because you wanted to help her, but because you wanted to attack your political opponents. And when people called your bluff by actually offering to help, you had to refuse. Because if they fixed her house, it would expose that you could have fixed it yourself at any time, but chose not to." He pulled out financial records. "Let's do the math. You earned $174,000 in 2021. Your Tesla lease or payment, roughly $500 to $800 per month. Your luxury apartment, approximately $2,500 to $3,000 per month. Repairs to your grandmother's house, according to contractors who reviewed the photos, estimated $15,000 to $25,000. Kennedy looked up. "You could have fixed your grandmother's house with less than 2 months of your salary. Instead, you let her live with buckets catching rainwater while you drove your Tesla to Whole Foods and swam in your infinity pool." The hearing room was completely silent, except for the sound of reporters typing. "But here's what really bothers me," Kennedy continued. "After the GoFundMe was shut down and the money refunded, you never addressed it, never explained, never said, 'Thank you, but we're handling it privately.' Just silence. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that conservatives showed more concern for your grandmother than you did." He pulled out a timeline. June 2nd, 2021, you post photos of your grandmother's house. June 4th, 2021, conservatives raise $104,000. June 5th, 2021, your family refuses the money. And then, nothing. No updates on your grandmother's house. No explanation of how you're helping her. No transparency whatsoever. Kennedy looked at her. "Is your grandmother's house repaired now?" AOC's lawyer stood up. Mr. Chairman, questions about the Congresswoman's family members are beyond the scope. She made her grandmother's living conditions a public issue, Kennedy said flatly. She posted photos on social media. She blamed political figures. She made it everyone's business. So now it's everyone's business. Answer the question, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Is your grandmother's house repaired? AOC's voice was barely audible. My grandmother has housing. That's not what I asked. Is the house you photographed, the one you said Trump abandoned, is it repaired? The situation with hurricane relief in Puerto Rico is complex. It's a yes or no question, yes or no. AOC looked down at the table. I'm not going to discuss my family's private. You already did. Kennedy's voice rose slightly, the first time he'd shown real emotion. You posted the photos. You made it a campaign issue. You used her suffering to attack your political enemies. You don't get to hide behind privacy now. He gathered himself, returning to his calm demeanor. Let me tell you what this looks like to the American people. It looks like a rich congresswoman who doesn't help her own grandmother while living in luxury. It looks like someone who uses family members as political props. It looks like someone who refused $104,000 in charity, not because the money wasn't needed, but because it came from the wrong people. Kennedy pulled out one more document. In the week after your grandmother tweets, you attended multiple fundraisers in New York and Washington. Your campaign finance reports show you raised over $300,000 that week. You had time and energy to raise money for yourself. But your grandmother, she could wait. He looked directly at AOC. You lecture us about caring for vulnerable people. You demand we support government programs to help families in need, but you won't help your own grandmother with your own money. That's not hypocrisy, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. That's something worse. That's using the suffering of your own family to gain political advantage. Kennedy closed the folder on that section. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about your grandmother specifically. This is about a pattern of saying one thing and doing another. A pattern of demanding from others what you refuse to give yourself. A pattern of performance over principle. He opened his final folder. And that brings us to the big picture. Let's put all these pieces together and see what they tell us about who you really are. Kennedy stood up from his seat, an unusual move that drew every eye in the chamber. He walked to the display screen and stood beside it, his Louisiana frame tall and deliberate. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I want to show the American people something. A comparison. A before and after, if you will. He clicked to a split screen. On the left, AOC's tweets and public statements. On the right, her actual conduct. Click left side, tax the rich. Right side, attends $35,000 per ticket gala, accepts thousands in designer gifts, parties with billionaires. Click left side, champion of workers. Right side, stiffs makeup artists and hair stylists for 5 months, wears dress by designer who runs sweatshop with unpaid interns. Click left side, attacks Tesla and Elon Musk. Right side, drives $55,000 Tesla, refuses to buy union-made alternative. Click left side, attacks Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Right side, shops at Whole Foods owned by Amazon. Kills 25,000 Amazon jobs in Queens. Click left side, healthcare is a human right. Right side, designer's company fails to pay workers' compensation insurance, leaving employees unprotected. Click left side, posts photos of grandmother's suffering. Right side, refuses $104,000 in donations to help her, never reveals if house was repaired. Click left side, I identify with working families. Right side, lives in luxury apartment with infinity pool and golf simulator, earns top 5% income. Kennedy turned away from the screen to face AOC directly. Do you see the pattern? Every single position you take publicly is contradicted by how you actually live. You've built what I call a palace of mirrors. Everything looks righteous and principled on the surface, but it's all reflection. No substance, no consistency, no integrity. He walked slowly back toward his seat. The palace of mirrors works like this. You take a position that sounds good, tax the rich. That's your mirror on the left. It reflects an image of someone who cares about inequality. But turn that mirror around and what do we see? Someone who parties with the rich. Someone who accepts gifts from the rich. Someone who won't pay the non-rich workers who served her. Kennedy continued packing. Another mirror, champion of workers, looks great from the front. But behind it, a woman who stiffs vendors, wears clothes made in what employees call a sweatshop, refuses to buy union-made cars, and killed 25,000 working-class jobs in her own district. He sat back down, his voice quieter now but somehow more powerful. You've surrounded yourself with these mirrors. Stand in the middle and all you see are reflections of how righteous you look, how principled, how committed to justice. But the rest of us, we can walk around those mirrors. We can see what's behind them. And what's behind them is someone who doesn't believe a word she says. He pulled out one final document. The House Ethics Committee investigation into your Met Gala attendance took 3.5 years. They reviewed 12,000 pages of documents. They interviewed dozens of witnesses. They examined every email, every invoice, every payment. And you want to know what they found? Kennedy read from the report. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's violations were not knowing and willful. That means they determined you didn't deliberately set out to break the rules. You weren't consciously corrupt. You were just careless, entitled. You thought the rules didn't apply to you. He set down the report. And that's the truth, isn't it? You don't think the rules apply to you. Ethics rules about gifts. Those are for other people. Rules about paying vendors on time, for other people. Expectations that you'll practice what you preach, for other people. Kennedy looked at her with something almost like pity. You've convinced yourself that your intentions are so pure, your cause so righteous, that the normal rules of consistency and integrity don't matter. You can attack the rich while partying with them. You can champion workers while exploiting them. You can demand others pay their fair share while wearing a dress made by a tax cheat. He paused. But here's the thing about palaces made of mirrors. They're fragile. One crack and the whole thing shatters. And today, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, we've put a lot of cracks in your palace. Kennedy gathered his folders. You came here to question a nominee's fitness for office. You attacked his character. You called me corrupt. You lectured us about serving the people versus serving the rich. But you have no standing to judge anyone. Your own conduct has disqualified you from claiming any moral authority. He looked directly at her one last time. So let me ask you directly. Do you actually believe the things you say? Or is it all just performance? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've built an entire career on saying what sounds good while doing what benefits you. And that's not democratic socialism. That's not championing the working class. That's narcissism wrapped in progressive rhetoric. Kennedy stood. Mr. Chairman, I'm done with this witness. She has no credibility to judge this or any other nominee. I move that we end her testimony and proceed with our actual business, evaluating the qualifications of Secretary-designate Morrison, who, unlike some people in this room, has never violated ethics rules, never stiffed working-class vendors, and never used his own grandmother as a political prop. Chairman Thompson, looking relieved to finally have an exit, nodded quickly. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you are dismissed. Thank you for your testimony. The committee will take a 30-minute recess. AOC stood on shaky legs. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Her lawyer took her arm and guided her toward the exit. As she walked past Kennedy's seat, she stopped. "This isn't over," she whispered. Kennedy didn't look up from organizing his papers. "Ma'am, for you, I'm afraid it is." She left the chamber, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, her political career crumbling with each step. In the gallery, the progressive activists sat in stunned silence. AOC's social media team had already left. The mirrors had shattered, and in Louisiana, somewhere on the bayou, an alligator slipped into dark water, patient and eternal. The 30-minute recess became 90 minutes. Behind closed doors, Democratic leadership scrambled. Emergency calls went out to the squad. Crisis management teams assembled. But there was no managing this crisis. Every fact Kennedy cited was documented, verifiable, a matter of public record. In a Capitol corridor, AOC held an impromptu press conference, surrounded by Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush, along with representatives from several progressive advocacy groups. "Today I was subjected to a coordinated attack," AOC began, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and tears. Senator Kennedy used his position of power to attack a young woman of color who dared to speak truth about economic inequality. She paused for effect. Instead of discussing the Trump nominee's dangerous policies, he chose to make me the issue. He cherry-picked documents, took things out of context, and weaponized ethics processes to silence a progressive voice. A reporter raised his hand. "Congresswoman, Senator Kennedy cited the House Ethics Committee's findings that you violated ethics rules. Are those findings wrong?" AOC's jaw tightened. The committee concluded there was no willful misconduct. "But they did find violations," the reporter pressed. "They ordered you to pay additional money to settle the matter. That's not cherry-picking. That's the committee's official finding. The ethics process is often weaponized against women of color." Another reporter interrupted. "What about your Tesla? You've promised for 2 years to buy a union-made vehicle, but haven't." Senator Kennedy's timeline on that was accurate, wasn't it? "My personal vehicle choices are not the issue here." "But you made them the issue," a third reporter interjected. "You've criticized others for not supporting union workers while you drive a non-union Tesla. How do you respond to that?" AOC's communications director stepped in. "We're not going to litigate every conservative talking point." The Congresswoman came to the Senate to discuss serious policy concerns and instead was subjected to a personal attack. This press conference is over. But the reporters kept shouting questions as AOC walked away. "What about your grandmother's house? Why did your family refuse the donations? Did you pay the Met Gala vendors on time or not? Do you still live in the luxury building with the infinity pool?" AOC and her team fled down the corridor, the questions echoing behind them. By the time the hearing reconvened, the political world had exploded. On Twitter, "Kennedy destroys AOC, 5.2 million tweets. Palace of Mirrors, 3.8 million tweets. Met Gala hypocrisy, 2.1 million tweets." The video clips had already been viewed over 150 million times across all platforms. Conservative media was in rapture. Liberal media was in crisis mode. But mainstream outlets were simply reporting the facts, because the facts were damning enough. CNN's Jake Tapper opened his show. "Whatever your politics, what happened in the Senate today was remarkable." A member of Congress who's built her brand on calling out hypocrisy had her own contradictions systematically exposed using her own financial records and official ethics findings. MSNBC struggled to find an angle. Rachel Maddow tried. The Republican attack on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez today was clearly coordinated, but her own panel pushed back. "Rachel," a Democratic strategist interrupted, "I've read the Ethics Committee report. The delayed payments are real. The violations are real. This isn't a Republican attack. These are documented facts." Fox News ran the entire hearing footage in prime time with minimal commentary. The facts spoke for themselves. By midnight, polling collapse. Favorability in NY14 dropped from 68% to 52% in 6 hours. National favorability among Democrats down 15 points. Independents 23 points. Political fallout. 3 major Democratic donors announced they would support a primary challenger. House Democratic leadership privately discussed asking her to step back from committee work. Squad members offered tepid support statements, but none defended her specific conduct. Media dominance. 347 million video views by day's end. Trending #1 in 31 countries. 12.4 million tweets. Saturday Night Live already writing sketches. Within 48 hours, the consequences accelerated. Richie Torres, a moderate Democrat representing the Bronx, announced he was considering a primary challenge. "New York's 14th District deserves representation that focuses on delivering results, not performing for social media," he said carefully. His exploratory committee raised $1.2 million in the first 72 hours. The House Ethics Committee announced it was reviewing additional matters related to AOC's campaign finance practices and vendor payments. The carefully worded statement was devastating. They only announced reviews when they had substantial evidence. House Democratic leadership quietly suggested AOC focus on constituent services rather than high-profile committee work. She was removed from lead sponsor status on 3 bills. Committee chairs stopped inviting her to strategy sessions. Squad solidarity crumbled. Ilhan Omar offered vague support. "We stand with members who fight for working families." Note, she didn't defend AOC's specific conduct. Rashida Tlaib, silent for 36 hours, then posted about a different issue. AOC's closest ally, Cori Bush, had lost her own primary 2 months prior. Couldn't help. Media investigations accelerated. The New York Times dropped an investigative piece, "The Contradictions of AOC, a Pattern of Performance over Practice." The 6,000-word article documented every instance of her criticizing behavior she herself engaged in. Timeline of promises versus actions, union car, vendor payments, etc. Interviews with former staffers describing a culture of entitlement. Financial analysis showing her lifestyle inconsistent with her rhetoric. The Washington Post followed with the Met Gala ethics case. How AOC's defense evolved from "I did nothing wrong" to "it wasn't willful." Even progressive outlets had to cover it objectively. The Intercept, usually sympathetic, ran a piece. Can AOC survive her own contradictions? AOC's political position had fundamentally shifted. Fundraising collapse. Q4 2024 fundraising, $2.1 million. Q1 2025 after Kennedy, $623,000. Major donors fled. Small dollar donations down 67%. Meanwhile, her potential primary challenger raised $3.4 million in first month, endorsed by 2 major unions, ironically including the UAW. Support from moderate Democrats tired of squad drama. Media transformation. No longer invited on cable news shows, too controversial. Progressive podcasts still supportive, but even they asked hard questions. Comedy shows made her the punchline. Palace of Mirrors became shorthand for political hypocrisy. And back home, town halls became contentious. Constituents asked about the Tesla, the apartment, the grandmother. Local press aggressive in questioning. Primary polling showed her lead shrinking, 52-31, previously 68-15. 3 months after the hearing, AOC gave an interview to The New Yorker, attempting to rehabilitate her image. The reporter asked about the grandmother situation. "Have you repaired your grandmother's house?" Long pause. "My family has made arrangements for my grandmother's care." "That's not what I asked. The house you photographed, the one with the leaking roof, has it been repaired?" The situation with hurricane relief in Puerto Rico is ongoing. Congresswoman Matt Walsh raised $104,000 specifically to repair that house. Your family refused it. If the house needed repairs and you couldn't afford it, why refuse the money? And if you could afford it, why didn't you fix it yourself? Another long pause. "I think we're done here." The interview ended. The article, when published, was titled, "AOC Can't Answer the Simplest Questions About Her Own Conduct." 6 months later, AOC announced she would not seek re-election. The statement was carefully crafted. "After much reflection and discussion with my family, I've decided to focus my advocacy work outside of Congress. I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished, but I believe I can be most effective fighting for progressive values in a different capacity." Nobody believed it. Internal polling showed her losing the primary by 19 points. Major donors had abandoned her. The party establishment was quietly supporting her challenger. She was being forced out. Her final speech on the House floor was sparsely attended. She spoke about her immigrant background, her pride in representation, her commitment to justice. She never mentioned Kennedy, never mentioned the hearing, never acknowledged the contradictions. When she finished, the applause was polite, brief, and hollow. She left the chamber at age 34, her meteoric political career over almost as quickly as it had begun. Senator John Kennedy experienced the opposite trajectory. The Monday after the hearing, his office was buried in thank-you notes, flowers, and gifts from constituents. His staff had to rent additional space to store them all. His fundraising exploded. First week, $4 million. First month, $11.8 million. By quarter's end, $18.3 million, the largest quarterly haul for any non-presidential candidate in modern history. Republican leadership took notice. He was offered spots on every Sunday show, book deals worth millions, speaking fees of $100,000 plus. He declined almost all of it. "I appreciate the offers," he told his chief of staff, "but I've got crawfish to tend to." He did accept a few. Louisiana Farm Bureau annual meeting, spoke about soybean futures and water management. Mentioned the hearing once. Sometimes you have to remind folks that actions speak louder than words. Now about those irrigation subsidies. Tulane University commencement address. Gave the graduates advice about integrity. Build your life on truth, not mirrors. Mirrors can make you look good, but they shatter easy. Truth might not be pretty, but it's solid. It lasts. One appearance on Fox News Sunday. Kept it brief. Host, "Senator, you've become a conservative hero. Any plans for higher office?" Kennedy smiled. "Ma'am, I'm 73 years old. Higher office sounds like a lot of stairs. I'm happy right where I am." Host, "You effectively ended a colleague's career." Kennedy, "No, ma'am. I didn't end her career. She did. Every fact I cited was real. Every question I asked was fair. If you can't defend your own conduct, you shouldn't be questioning others." Host, "Any regrets?" Kennedy smiled slightly. "Only that it was necessary. I wish we lived in a world where people meant what they said and practiced what they preached. But we don't. So sometimes you have to turn on the lights and expose what's hiding in the shadows." 3 months after the hearing, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Senator John Kennedy sat on his back porch in Madisonville, Louisiana. The sun was setting over the bayou, painting the water in shades of amber and gold. His grandson, Johnny Jr., sat beside him with a fishing pole. They'd been there for 3 hours, catching and releasing bass, talking about school and baseball and life. Kennedy's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another interview request from a national magazine. He ignored it, as he'd ignored the previous 67. "Papa," Johnny said, checking his line, "my teacher showed us the video at school. Everybody was talking about it." Kennedy smiled, adjusting his own line. "What did they say?" "That you made that lady cry, that you were really tough on her." Tommy said his mom cheered. Kennedy was quiet for a moment, watching a great blue heron glide across the water. "I wasn't trying to be tough, son. I was just asking questions that needed asking. But you had all those papers. You knew all that stuff about her. Were you scared?" "Scared? No, Johnny. Not even a little bit." "Why not?" Kennedy reeled in his line slowly, thinking about how to explain it. "You know how your mama always tells you the truth matters, even when it's hard." Johnny nodded. "Well, that lady built her whole career on saying things that sounded good, but she didn't live by those things. She said one thing and did another. And I had proof. Real documents, real facts. When you have truth on your side, you don't need to be scared." A bass struck Johnny's line, a good one. "Papa, I got him." "Easy now," Kennedy coached, setting down his own rod. "Keep your tip up. Let him run, that's it. Now reel steady." The fish fought hard, breaking the surface twice. Johnny worked it patiently, just like Kennedy had taught him. After 2 minutes, Kennedy scooped the net under a beautiful 3-pound largemouth. "Look at him, Papa." Kennedy examined the fish carefully. "That's a fine bass, Johnny. You did real good. Can we keep him?" Kennedy looked at the fish, then at his grandson. "Here's what I think. This one's got a lot more growing to do. Let's throw him back so he can get bigger and smarter. Then maybe we'll catch him again next year after he's learned from his mistakes." "You think fish remember getting caught?" "I think everything remembers getting caught," Kennedy said, gently removing the hook. "Getting caught teaches you to be more careful, to think twice before you bite something that looks too good to be true." He lowered the bass back into the water. It paused, as if considering what had just happened, then disappeared into the depths. Is that what happened with that lady? She got caught. Kennedy cast his line again. That's exactly right, son. She spent years biting at things that looked good, fame, attention, applause, without thinking about whether her actions matched her words. And eventually she got caught. Will she be more careful next time? I don't know if there will be a next time for her, but other people watching, they learned the lesson. That's the thing about truth. When it catches one person in a lie, it teaches 1,000 others to think twice. They fished in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent. Bats emerged to hunt insects. A bullfrog began its deep call. The bayou came alive with evening sounds. Papa, yeah, bud, are you going to run for president like they say on TV? Kennedy laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that echoed across the water. No, sir. I'm too old, too set in my ways, and too fond of this right here. He gestured at the bayou, the fishing poles, the peaceful evening. Being president means living in a city, working every day in meetings and never getting to fish. That sounds like a terrible job. But you'd be good at it. Maybe, but being good at something doesn't mean you have to do it. Sometimes the best thing is doing exactly what you're meant to do, right where you are. And I'm meant to be here in Louisiana, representing folks like you and your mama and fishing in this bayou. Will you keep being a senator? For a while longer, until they get sick of me or I get sick of them, whichever comes first. He grinned. Johnny giggled. You're funny, Papa, and you're a good fisherman. Getting dark, though. Time to head in. Your grandma's making gumbo. 5 more minutes. Kennedy smiled. All right, 5 more minutes. They sat in the gathering darkness, lines in the water. 3 generations of Louisiana wisdom, sitting side by side. Kennedy thought about AOC's destroyed credibility, about the lesson Washington had learned, about truth's slow but inevitable victory. But mostly he thought about this, teaching his grandson to fish and tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it's hard. This was what mattered, not the cable news or the viral videos or the political victories. This, the bayou, the truth, the next generation. As full darkness fell, they packed up their gear and walked back to the house, where Kennedy's wife had hot gumbo waiting, and the television was mercifully turned off. Behind them, the bayou flowed on patient, eternal, separating truth from lies, substance from performance, integrity from pretense. Just like it always had, just like it always would. The palace of mirrors had shattered, and in Louisiana, the bayou remembered.